I'm Kyle Malnati, your host of the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. At Calibrate, we exist to help people create generational wealth through real estate. My personal mission is to encourage, empower, and educate you by sharing best practices from business leaders that are proven winners. Broadcasting from the Mile High City, thank you for tuning in to the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. My name is Kyle Malnati. I'm your host, and our esteemed guest today is Amber Miller. Amber has her own podcast called My Flipping Life. I love that. She is a real estate investor and goes through and flips houses. We've actually never spoken to someone on the subject before, so I am thrilled to invite Amber onto our show today. Welcome, Amber.
Thanks for having me, Kyle.
Thanks for joining us from Minnesota. Here in Colorado, there are a lot of different companies that do renovations, restorations. I liked, as we were prepping, that you shared that you've got kind of three core concepts: renovation, real estate, and real life. Where did you come up with that? It makes so much sense to me, but how did you kind of come across those three core tenets of how you operate your business?
Well, the renovation part comes in, obviously, when you're talking about flipping. And I think for many people, their challenge with the thought of flipping and really being able to do it well and do it confidently comes from the lack of renovation or construction knowledge. So that's where I pulled that from. Real estate goes obviously into the property part of it. And it doesn't necessarily matter if you have your license or not, because I didn't start with my license, so I have it now. And then the real life part of it is there's always a learning curve, no matter how much experience you have. I'm close to, I haven't done a count lately, but well over 150 properties. I've got to be close to 200 at this point. And every time I do a property, I'm learning something new. And I let everybody know that if there isn't something that I'm learning new every single time I do a property, either with how I work with a contractor or how we market the property or the choices I make for the design, then I need to find something else to do. And then, just the hiccups that happen, like COVID, nobody could have anticipated that, right? But that's a real life part of business, and it's a real life part of business for everybody, whether you're in real estate or a restaurateur. That's just how things go. And sometimes I feel like people pull back and keep themselves out of the real estate business and investing because of those fears. And the reality is the circumstances that can affect real estate can affect any business, including one that maybe you're an employee of.
I so love that you talked about the fears that people naturally feel with embarking on something new. There's always this kind of resistance. Mm-hmm. And you had shared with me that you were in financial services. You had a career in financial services, and we're kind of back in 2007, 13 years ago. You drew this metaphorical line in the sand. We were like, I'm going to do this. And for those that are listening that have always had this desire to do real estate investing and maybe haven't done it yet, what were some of the things that you went through mentally, but then also some action steps where you're like, I've got to push through this fear of doing my first investment property, and kind of walk us through the person that's maybe starting and how they even get started in this kind of crazy world. And real estate investing can, you've got all sorts of twists and turns and things behind the wall that you weren't expecting when you start to do demo and all that. So how'd you get started, and what have you learned, as you've gone through, a couple hundred flips now?
The thing I encourage people who are on the fence about this process is it wouldn't matter if you were going to buy a rental property for the first time, if you were going to buy a flip for the first time, or if you were going to go interview for another job. All of those things are new. They're all different experiences. They're all going to require something a little bit different of you. And even if you were starting a new job, there's some fear with that. What I encourage people to think about is the capacity and the potential that you have when you take on something new with the real estate side of the newness, right? So when you decide to buy a rental property for the first time, you're looking at something that's going to change your life, and it's going to create income. The same is true of flipping. It just depends on what your preference is. But the things you go through are, everybody that I talk to has this thought for years about, gosh, I really wish I could do that. Or I've always wanted to do that, but I didn't know where to start. And so my advice is just pick one thing and start. There's so much information on the internet right now. You can start researching your local markets without ever contacting an agent. Because I think a lot of people feel that fear, especially when they're thinking about, oh my gosh, I've got to find an agent. Nobody's going to want to work with me because I'm new and I don't know what I'm doing. And they start this narrative that really paralyzes them before they ever get started. And again, if you want a different life, you have to be willing to do things that other people are not. And when you recognize that, you know what, you might not find the right realtor, it might take a little while, that's okay. It's going to take you a while to find that flip, because not every house is a perfect flip, and that's okay. But you have to start somewhere. So even the smallest steps can make a big difference. And so for me, I researched our market for probably, gosh, a good 6 to 12 months before I ever even contacted an agent and went out and started to look at properties.
I remember when I was taking classes, my degree at the University of Wyoming years ago was in finance. And I remember a great finance professor that actually spent time on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange before he became a professor. He shared with us, he said, don't ever invest in something until you have sort of run a model or done a mock investment and track that for 6 months or a year. It's like, pretend, you know, you're using monopoly money and say, I'm going to use $1,000 to invest in this or whatever, and start to track and see and really study I'm glad that you said that, to really study your inventory before you start jumping in. Because I think so many people, there's kind of two sides. There's the, you know, analysis paralysis. And we know, okay, they need to at some point start. But then the other part is like, there's no in between. The other part is like, I'm just going to get in there and I'm going to make mistakes and actively learn and just kind of go through it. And that's going to be a great learning experience. And it's like, that could be a recipe for disaster if you don't take some time to research. How did, as you were approaching this idea of becoming an investor and flipping houses, how did your financial services background, working in annuities and long-term care and working for this company all the way back, 13 years ago, how did that provide you with a good foundation? Because you weren't a real estate agent, and most of the people we interview at some point have been a real estate agent. You are now, but maybe think back and just see what that foundation was like and what really benefited you as you were approaching the investment business.
Well, it's interesting. I actually haven't thought about that before. I knew that I wanted to flip because I knew that the larger sums of money were more attractive to me. I felt like you could make more progress on whatever financial goal you had for yourself working with those types of returns. So the $20,000 to $30,000 returns on a flip that you could earn in 6 months. I mean, if I made a $30,000 profit on a flip, that was nearly what my annual salary was in 2007. So that was really attractive. It was more attractive to me than the option of cash flowing a rental property that I maybe had put $20,000 or $30,000 into, and then was collecting, $200 to $300 a month. That model just wasn't as attractive to me. But I understand for some people it does work. In financial services, we were modeling people's savings from their careers and putting it into instruments that would pay them distributions over time. And people were really, some people were not in great positions financially. They hadn't had the savings, or maybe they hadn't worked as many years as they had wanted to. And so, like I said, I never really thought about that, but I mentally, that's got to have influenced my perspective, because there was a lot of people where we would run models and we were like, they really don't have enough to fund their lifestyle past the age of 67, right? And they're wanting to early retire and they're 57. And, so that's one of the things I think from a financial services standpoint, I probably looked at and thought, nah. But the other thing is the returns. The returns on flipping were significantly different than, trying to get a fixed rate of interest of about 4%. At the high, it was about 6% in the annuity industry. And that was back in like 2008, 2009. And I know not everybody has products like that anymore. So really the idea that you have to take ownership for your financial future, no matter what you choose to do with it, but that you can't rely on other things to provide the type of lifestyle or income that you want.
Yes, I so agree that many investors, and if you just think about the broad investment world, I mean, you're talking about annuities, you can talk about financial services as it relates to stocks, bonds, mutual funds, real estate's a part of it. So many people really depend on an algorithm anymore, depend on a computer program to set their investments, and they sort of set it and forget it. I completely agree with you that you have to take charge of your financial future. And it's one of the things that really attracted me to the real estate industry. Getting a degree in finance, real estate fell under that umbrella at the University of Wyoming. And this is, 20 years ago. And I was like, really curious about it because my dad was in financial services, probably more on a similar path that you were. And I was like, it just doesn't really speak to me. I like the idea of investing, but what I was missing was the tangible part of it, that literally kick the bricks, as the saying would go, or touching, seeing the improvement. And unfortunately, as I've noticed as a real estate agent, I've heard a bunch of different discussions about this. Unfortunately, the average buyer doesn't have a lot of imagination. And what happens is most people, as they walk through a home, they see it for what it is and say, this is how it is. And I can remember this several times. I can think of some family members that they bought a house because of the other person's decor. It's like that stuff's going away. I mean, besides like the paint on the walls, but they'd move in and they'd never paint for 15 years that they'd lived there in the house. And I'm actually selling a property right now that, by and large, all of the improvements were done by the prior owner. And this family's lived in here for over a decade. And so you're a designer. And that's really the way that you've approached the business. I can see if you're looking at YouTube as our audience, if you're looking at the background there, beautiful design in your kitchen. And I think that as a flipper, it's really important that you approach the business through that lens of design. And as someone that is going to be actually projecting forward what someone might be living like, I think that's a really, really important foundation and basis. So as a designer, what are some of the things that you can see that you typically go through that maybe other people that give you a competitive advantage?
That's a great question. And I will say it has evolved because when I first started doing flips back in 2007, 2008, I was buying houses that were $25,000, $35,000. And my budgets weren't nearly what they are now. I've pivoted a few times as the market has changed and has the demand for the houses that we've done. But the things I know now to be 100% true about a competitive advantage from the design standpoint have very little to do with budget and everything to do with planning and imagination. And I am not a trained designer at all. Everything that I do is self-taught. So anybody can do it, which is the great thing about it. And I think we've got more tools for inspiration now than we've ever had before, thinking like Pinterest and Instagram. There are so many visual images you can see and that you can then recreate for little to no additional investment. So the things I think that really set houses apart are the things that people would expect to find in much more expensive houses. So one of the things is lighting. Kitchen lighting, big pendant lighting chandeliers, not necessarily expensive, but requires a little bit more than a trip to Home Depot by your contractor. Let's just put it that way. And the evolution and the price point of these lights has changed too. It used to be that things that were very expensive, you wouldn't ever put into a flip because you would kind of figure like if somebody really wants that, they'll put it in themselves. But buyers don't want that. Buyers truly want that move-in experience. They want to walk in and feel like, all they need to bring is their own personal items to live there. Paint colors. So the neutral, the light and bright, big deal. Doesn't cost anything. You're painting almost any property you're working on, no matter what your budget is, you're likely painting. Flooring, doing the hardwoods and the engineered hardwood if you have a house that doesn't have original hardwood, big deal. Hardware, again, not just going to Home Depot or a big box store and buying the contractor pack of brushed nickel knobs, right? You can order things on Amazon that on another site would be $25 a pull. You can find them in, for a tenth of that price on Amazon. Small carpentry things too, that anybody who is skilled with a saw can do. So creating end panels for cabinets, like where fridges are. One of the things we often see, I walk through flips all the time. I actually get asked by other investors to walk through their flips and give them feedback. And I also get asked by lenders who have properties they've funded that are not selling, I get asked to go through those properties and create a list for the seller of things to change so that it's more attractive. Custom end panels for a kitchen island are a very simple creation. Shiplap is very popular, easy to do, doesn't cost a lot for the materials or the labor. And then open shelving, replacing a couple cabinets with open shelving. Again, you're actually saving yourself money because cabinets are more expensive than those open shelves, and buyers love it. And it feels high end.
That is great advice. And my wife and I have gone through the experience of doing a renovation and an addition on our home. We added about 1,200 square feet to an already 2,200 square foot home with then a basement. And going through that process, what we were amazed about, and we did a few things that, it's kind of like pat ourselves on the back. We decided to not do an orange peel or knockdown texture on the drywall. We did a kind of a skip trowel texture, and everybody that is in our neighborhood walks in and they go, this is incredible. So that's one thing that, obviously it's a fine art and you've got to find a good drywall finisher to do that. But that was something I was amazed at how inexpensive that was relative to the whole project. Yeah. Baseboard, and the thickness and height of the baseboard was another thing where it was just like, oh my gosh. And that was hardly expensive. It was crazy to think of how inexpensive the base was compared to, everybody thinks of like, okay, crown molding and what does it look like above, but having it look really, really custom on your base, I think was another thing. I love all of your advice. Okay. So the next question I have for you, we've got to dive into this concept of budgeting, profit, because I think most aspiring investors in the area of real estate, whether you're flipping or going to hold something for rental, they think about like, okay, I love, the concept and I want it to look like my house. And this should be a house like I would want to move into. I would imagine that is potentially a recipe for disaster because you can overspend. And so as you're coaching and you've got your podcast, My Flipping Life, but you're also coaching, you're sharing with other flippers, lenders, just different people that ask you for your advice. What are some do's and don'ts as someone builds a budget out? I know you don't know the property that they're going to buy, but what are some things that you look for as you're maybe taking a pretty strong and hard look at an investment and how you build out your budget and what it looks like on the end with your profit margin? Sure.
Well, there's a lot of different ways people talk about putting together a budget, especially when you're flipping or analyzing a deal. And I think most commonly it's probably the 70% rule. And unfortunately, in most markets, and even back in 2007, when I was doing it, that 70% model was very, very difficult to achieve. So I guess the first thing I would say is when you're looking at a budget for a house, the best thing that you can do is know what the houses in that area that have the features that you're thinking about including, what those houses are selling for, because those really are your benchmark. And if they don't have things you're thinking about adding, then don't add them. Because what you want to do ultimately price-wise is you're looking to be the best house, but not necessarily priced the highest. And one of the challenges I think people face too is they look at a project and they think, well, I don't want to do that unless I'm going to make $75,000. And the reality is, if you don't do the project, you make nothing. So if you made 50 instead of 75, is it really a bad project? So, and again, all of this evolves as you go through business and as you learn more and become more confident in your numbers and in your finished product. But I think one of the mistakes people make is they look at something and they say, I won't even bother doing that if I don't make X amount of money. And that's a mistake, because I firmly believe that's a mistake, because if you never do something because you don't perceive it to be a significant enough profit, you're never going to learn. And if you can't make 20, how are you going to get to 40? How are you going to get to 60, right? And in the market we've been in the past, gosh, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. I don't know how, I'm sure Colorado's the same. If you plan for a $20,000 or $30,000 profit and you go into a multiple offer situation, you might end up making $40,000 or $50,000. But again, if you never do it, you're never going to know. And if you don't ever do it, then you don't know what you could have done differently next time or what you could do better next time. So I think there's this philosophy that people have that really interferes with their ability to do it. But budget-wise, I walk into a house and I'm looking immediately at the big ticket items. So I'm looking at the things that I know a home inspector or a buyer are going to expect to be done. So those are your safety things. So like your HVAC, your heating and cooling. Windows are a big ticket item. If you had to have windows replaced on a house, and especially we live in a really harsh climate, that's an energy efficiency item too. And because we're able to contract everything out at once, we can do those things at a lower amount than a homeowner could. We can finish a basement for a fraction of what a contractor would charge a homeowner to do for finishing a basement. So we're going to do that because we get the value on the resale side for, again, a small fraction of the initial investment. So I've got a checklist that I use that I have always used where I'm going through and I'm assessing dollar amounts as I go through, and I can do a budget in about 90 seconds at this point. But I've walked through hundreds of houses, which again, when you're getting started, that's how you learn. You have to walk through houses. You absolutely do. But I love the idea, and I encourage people to do this too. Look at your market, look at the neighborhoods, look at what houses are selling for that aren't fixed up. You're gonna find houses that are fixed up too. Look at what those are selling for. There's so much data available now online, and you can get a pretty good idea of what the spread is that they're working with. So that's really helpful, I think, when you're not sure how to start, is doing that. Because at the end of the day, if you say, I want to buy a house for $50,000, but your market, nowhere near your market or within a 50-mile radius of your market, has houses available for $50,000, then you've got to make some adjustments.
Let's talk more about your checklist. A book that I got as a Christmas gift this past Christmas was the Checklist Manifesto. And the core theme of the book is that a lot of people assume that surgeons and pilots, those are the two core kind of job areas that they think about, that they are, savants. They're extremely intelligent, and they are. And so therefore they should step into their profession and just know how to do things. And actually what they've noticed is that, huge drop off in accidents when you have a pilot that goes through a checklist, a huge drop off in on the surgery table deaths when surgeons go through a checklist. And it's not because they are paint by numbers. I mean, these are brilliant people, but if they've got the checklist in front of them, they're going to be that much more effective and successful. So I love this because in my own brokerage company, I'm constantly talking about have a marketing plan, step by step through it. It's going to change. Every client's going to be a little bit different. Every deal, every flip's going to be different. But how did you start your checklist? What are some of the these are non-negotiables on my checklist that I'm always looking for? And I can tell you kind of went through a little bit of that, but let's talk about that checklist because I think that is a key to success.
Yeah. So I found myself doing this process that I would look at so many houses that I would not remember necessarily, was that roof on that house good or does it need to be replaced? Because when I came back after looking at properties and was running numbers, I was trying to guess, or I was having to look up the permit history, and sometimes that's not necessarily accurate. So what I did was I created these big ticket items that I'm looking at. So and some of them are very simple. As you walk up to a house, and I've noticed this with other investors I've taken out too and helped them find properties. You're so interested in getting into the house, you forget to look on the outside. So concrete is a huge expense. Is the walkway crumbling? Is it uneven? Are the steps shot? Because that's probably $3,000 to $5,000 if it needs to be replaced, depending on the length, right? So we start with that. We talk about, I do curb appeal. So I'm looking at the things on the exterior. What's the material of the siding? Some materials need to be remediated potentially. Some need to be encapsulated if it's asbestos. If it's stucco, is it a type of surface that can be painted? Like metal siding can be painted, vinyl not so much. But then again, you're also looking at your aluminum soffit fascia wrap on your windows, your front door, but all of these things add up. And if you miss any of these on the exterior, you could be looking at a very unpleasant surprise with your budget. I also look at garages. We've got a variety of neighborhoods that have different types of garages. Most of them are detached in the city, but some of those structures can be really, really in poor shape. So they might need a new slab. We call it the lean when it's built in 1908 and it's not even suitable for one small car. That's, and at the price point that house would sell at, is that what a buyer would expect? Or would they expect a 2-car garage? Because that's a significant expense you need to account for as well. And then going inside the house, looking at the different surfaces, what can you salvage? And again, at the price point you're thinking that this house will resell at, based off the comps that what would a buyer expect? And I think that's a different shift in mentality for people. Oftentimes they'll go into a house and they'll think, what's the least I can get away with? But buyers are more savvy now than they have ever been. And they can very easily identify a property that was done where corners have been cut. And so that's the worst thing I think that happens with flippers, is they go into these properties and that's what their mentality is. And they end up with an overpriced and underperforming property that buyers are not interested in. And then it sits on the market and they start to see those price reductions accumulate. And when you've got a very strong market and that's happening, it's really the kiss of death for a flip, for sure.
That's great advice. And as we think about more advice for people that are interested in doing this, you have a whole podcast. Again, we shared this at the beginning of the show, called My Flipping Life. How do people go and find that? And how often do you release episodes on your podcast? And then I'll ask a question about the podcast, Amber, and then we'll go into 2 final questions I ask every guest, okay, as we finish up our show.
Yeah, we do weekly episodes of the podcast. We are fairly new. We started releasing in March, so I think we're on episode 16. And I do interviews with other people who are in the industry, who might do something a little bit different than I do, just so I can have a little bit of a different perspective for people who are interested. But a lot of the episodes, I'm talking about very specific things that I do within my business, lessons that I've learned, things that I have found to work well when working with real estate investors, with other realtors, with contractors, and just my general experience in real estate overall. Because it's interesting, when we had all those changes back in March, there was this immediate we told you so kind of sound that came out of the world, where they were like, oh, real estate is gonna like it's done. And it was so interesting because I literally stopped consuming social media for a couple of days. So I was like, we had just literally bought our most expensive project, and we had closed on it, and we were just getting ready to start. And I was thinking to myself, well, this is interesting.
Oh no.
Because we can't do anything about it now. And the funny thing is, I had a conversation with the private lender on that project, and he actually mentioned that he doesn't know if he would have actually funded that project had it closed any later. And I thought to myself, wow, that was great. And now we're getting ready to finish that in the next 2 weeks, and we've got 6 buyers lined up to take a look at it. So
it's great.
It just goes to show you, having different perspectives and listening to different things will definitely change your perspective as well.
Yeah, you've got to love revisionist history, or the Monday morning quarterback where they're like, I'm not sure I would have done this. And it's like, well, great, thanks. Now that I'm actually invested in it and I, owe you some money or whatever, thanks for sharing. Thanks for opining.
Right, exactly. So,
okay. Last 2 questions, Amber Miller.
Sure.
Okay. You'd shared with me, and congratulations to you and Alan. You've got 2 girls. One just graduated high school. And this idea of Dear Younger Me, it actually comes from a song from a band named Mercy Me. And the concept of the song is the songwriters are sharing that they're writing a letter to themselves now that they're a little bit older, with some experiences that they've had that they want to share with the younger version of themselves. I personally call it, this isn't in the song, but I call it the advice you wish you knew when you were 22, because it rhymes and it's fun. So if you're going to actually share some knowledge about the real estate investing world, about flipping houses, about design, if someone comes up to you, here's your podcast, and they say, Amber, if you had to give me like one piece of advice, and I'm in my 20s, and what would that advice be? What would be the advice you'd give to someone in their early 20s?
This is a great question. The thing that comes to mind for me is the thought that you have to have blank in order to be successful. So you have to have a mentor. You have to have somebody who's connected in whatever it is you want to be connected. You have to know somebody in real estate. You have to know somebody in construction. You have to have a bank account with $100,000 in it. This idea that there's something that you individually are lacking that is going to make it so that you shouldn't do that or you can't be successful, that one single thought holds so many people back. And it doesn't have to be just applicable to real estate investing. In my corporate career, that was the buzzword back then was you need to have a mentor. You need to have somebody higher up who wants to, coach you. And if you didn't have a mentor, nobody identified you and tapped you on the shoulder, you were just stuck. And so that story and that narrative for me played out many times in my 20s. And what I have come to realize is that it's not having those things that determine your success. It's you. And most people who are successful don't have those things. Somehow we get caught up in that though, and we think that only people who are successful, it's because their parents did it or because their dad owns that construction company and he just followed his dad. But that's not necessarily true. And if that was true, we would have a lot less people who are successful in the world. So.
Yes. Yeah. Psychologists call that a limiting belief.
Yep.
Someone that I've interviewed a bunch of times on this podcast, a coach and realtor named Wayne Salmons. Wayne shared that we got to this point where he was super depressed and actually on the verge of committing suicide. And it's something he speaks openly about. And he was sitting there contemplating suicide and he realized that no one was coming to save him. And he created a coaching company called Hero Nation Coaching because he really empowers people to become their own hero. And you can figure it all out. You can do it. I love that answer, Amber. So the last question I ask everyone now, and it's a newer question because it's in honor of my career coach, Chris Oakley, who passed away. Chris was a member of the first 5 episodes of our podcast. Chris was someone that meant a lot to me. And his answer to that Dear Younger Me question was, when he was in his 20s, he was part of a mentoring group, a bunch of older guys, and it was a business leadership idea. They'd get together, and one of the things that they had to do is read this book called The Principle of the Path by Andy Stanley. And in that book, there's an exercise of where you actually write your own obituary. And that lesson became Chris's, really core throughout his 20s and into his 30s, and he passed away tragically, but he was on mission. And that was something that was so attractive about working with him. And so I ask all of my guests now, what is that legacy you want to leave? Your husband, Alan, you've got 2 girls, you've got a family, you've obviously got this business. You are doing some really cool things. What would you hope for, hopefully decades from now, as you're thinking about, someone that really cares about you writing a eulogy or what a newspaper would write in your own obituary? What would you want to be known for?
I would want to be known for honoring what I knew to be my calling, which my calling is entrepreneurship. My calling was to make my own path, make my own way, and not be limited by what other people interpreted my value to be. And so in keeping with that theme, one of my greatest motivations with my children has been to show them that success for people looks very different. It doesn't necessarily require that you go to school for 4 years after high school and that you get a job in a cubicle and stay there for 25 or 30 years. If that's what makes you happy and fulfilled, wonderful. But there's other ways to measure success in life. And it doesn't always have to do with finance. It can. Obviously, you have some more flexibility and you can make different choices when you're not as concerned with those types of things. But is it time? Is it doing things that you truly love? Is it doing things that you feel like really capitalize on what your gift is? And so I just actually walked up to a property yesterday to pick up a lockbox that we'd closed this property 4 weeks ago. The buyers moved here from California. And I walked up to the front steps and I was taking it off the railing and the door flies open. And the guy's standing there and he's like, "Are you Amber?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Oh, my wife is going to be so upset she missed you." He said, "Thank you for creating a beautiful home for us to raise our daughter in." And I'm not a formally trained designer. There's no reason why this happened. It's just how I fell into my strengths and my gifts. But I never would have gotten here I would never have that impact on people had I not bought that first terrible flip back in 2007 that everybody told me I couldn't do and that I shouldn't do. So that idea that you follow your calling, I don't know that you could ever say that that's not a good idea for people, because even if what initially happens isn't what you hope, it'll get you to a path that is where you're supposed to be.
Yes, that is such an amazing answer. And how, I mean, it gives you, wants to make you want to cry. It gives you goosebumps, gives you the whole thing when people are like, thank you for making this happen for me. And
yes.
How gratifying. It's amazing. Well, and at the end of every interview, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're out of time. Amber Miller, if someone wants to connect with you, what are a couple of great ways, either on social media or if they want to learn about flipping, go through some of your coaching, how do they get connected with you?
So Instagram is where I'm most active. It's Threshold Homes MN is our Instagram handle. And then also on our website, we have same handle, thresholdhomesmn.com. I do weekly blog posts as well. That's also where you can find all of our podcast episodes. We're on Spotify, iTunes, all of the normal places, but they're also all housed on the homepage of our website to make it easy for people. And then, feel free to send me an email if you've got questions, if there's content you're looking for. I also am pretty active we do videos that we post up on YouTube to help people walk through the process of flipping houses, from finding them to funding them. And we also do some before and after videos too. So I'm always recording content on a daily basis because it's very rare that I'm not walking through a house, either looking for a new project or checking on the status. We have 4 going right now, I believe. And then I actually was just scouting out some new ones this past weekend. So I've got some great footage too, because I tell you not only what to look for, but what to walk away from when it comes to flips, because not every house is a good flip.
Oh, so go out and get that. Again, Threshold Homes, and then the initials MN from Minnesota.
Yep.
Amber Miller, thank you so much for being on our show. A special shout out to Jason Edwards for referring us. Real estate's a referral-based business. Jason referred us. Thank you to Kayla Davis for producing this episode. As I stated before, my name is Kyle Malnati. I'm your host. And as I love to say, we will see you around the neighborhood. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.